In this video, I'm going to show you how I would generally approach optimizing a WordPress website to give us great results, fast page load times, all those kinds of things. We're going to be using a couple of tools to achieve this, but first of all, let me show you the website that we're working with and the results that I currently have. Then we'll reverse engineer how I've done things so I can show you how I would approach it. So first of all, let's take a quick look at the website. We're going to concentrate on the home page, and this is a really simple setup, but it does have some quite large images, a typical kind of layout for very common sites. So we've got the large hero image at the top, we've got some nice sized images underneath that, we've got some additional images, and we've got some background images. So it's already a relatively straightforward starting point, but those images are something we need to take a look at. And also, because I'm using the Elementor page builder, doesn't have to be Elementor, but page builders in general, they will add a little bit of bloat to your website. So we've got a couple of things we need to take into consideration. But first of all, let's take a look at the results that I have, and then let's see how I've actually gone about achieving them. Okay, so first of all, let's hop over into GT metrics, which is one of the most popular kind of ways of benchmarking your website. And this is the result that we currently have. It's not perfect. There's probably still room for some improvement. Now, there are various different factors that will influence the speed scores that you get on GT metrics and any of these kind of measuring tools. And that has to be taken into consideration. One of the most important ones is network traffic. In other words, if you were on shared hosting, lower cost hosting, then you're going to find that traffic will fluctuate and there's various different things. So you will see a fluctuation in the results, and we probably will see as we go through this video. However, it's always worth doing 2 or 3 or maybe even up to 5 different tests and then get a mean average to see what you're working with, to take into consideration those little fluctuations that you'll see. Okay, so this is where we are. As you can see, we've got a grade A. Performance and structure are looking pretty good. Our LCP, or largest contentful paint, is 518 milliseconds, so just over a half a second for the entire page to load in. No total blocking time and no cumulative layout shift. And all that is, cumulative layout shift, or CLS, is when your page is loading in, you don't want different parts of the page to shift about and move around when it's loading in. That can be distracting. So dealing with that is something that's always good to make sure you kind of have in place. What we're interested in, though, are the FCP, the first contentful paint, and the LCP, the largest contentful paint, which is an awful mouthful. But what they basically mean is your first contentful paint, your FCP, is how quick you start to see the first things appear on the page. And this can be one of the most important factors, because this will show to the person that's waiting for that page to load that something is happening. Therefore, there's less chance of them bouncing and leaving. And as long as we keep to under that 2 to 3 second rule, we should be good to go, but anything that's quicker is good. So you can see we're currently working on around about 400 milliseconds. Then we take a look at the largest contentful paint, the LCP. That's when all of your page is loaded in, so all the different parts of your page. So this is the area that is less important out of the two values, because lots of things are going to be below the fold. In other words, below what people can see when the page is loading. They have to scroll down to see those. So therefore, that isn't such a massive problem. But again, trying to get that below 3 seconds can be a good benchmark to work towards. So we're already on a good starting point here with the results that we have. If we hop over to PageSpeed Insights, you can see on mobile, we're currently getting a score of 92. And if we take a look at desktop, we're getting around 95. So we've got a great starting point in there. Now, PageSpeed Insights from Google is one of those things that people are obsessed with getting 100 across the board. And yes, that is a great benchmark to strive for, but it's also not necessarily the most important thing to strive for. We need to make sure that that FCP and the LCP are below that 3 second mark. The quicker, the better. Some of the other things are less important. So don't get obsessed by trying to get 100 across the board. We have a big difference between page speed as is reported with these kinds of benchmarking tools and the perceived page speed, which is you and I when we actually go to a website, when we click on a link that the next page loads almost instantaneously. These are the things that make the site feel snappier, more responsive. That is not always reflected in these scores. So just bear that in mind and be realistic about what you're going to actually achieve. Okay, so with that being said, mobile is a key area, and as you can see, one of the things that's kind of pushing our score down a little bit is the LCP slipping below that 3 second kind of benchmark. But 1.1 second is neither here nor there for most users, and you're going to find for most people the above the fold, the LC or the FCP is the key more important factor. Okay, so that's that side of things out of the way. How do we go about approaching things to get results like this on a website? Well, first of all, picking a good solid theme as your starting point is going to make a big difference. Now, yes, you can go over to sites like ThemeForest, and there are an abundance of great looking, versatile themes that cover so many different bases, but they're not always the most optimized themes to work with. There are some that are going to be absolutely fantastic, but unless you know which ones they are, you can spend a lot of time, effort, and money trying to find a good starting point. I think it's better to take a look at more generalized themes that have a much better optimized and accessible starting point. For this example, we're using the Astra theme. It's the free version. No Pro is being used at all. And there are some other great themes, things like GeneratePress, Blocksy, those kinds of things. I'll put some links in the description to ones that I would recommend you taking a look at that are great starting points that are very well optimized and give you some great tools to optimize things even more to give you a solid starting point. So with that being said, we're also using Elementor, again, the free version. So we're using a page builder as opposed to Gutenberg. Part of that, when you use a page builder, is you invariably add additional code, additional bloat into things. So we need to deal with that side of things as well. So bearing that in mind, when you set things up, when you choose the tools that you want, can be an important factor. But first things first, when you're working with any kind of tool to build your page layouts, whether it's a page builder like Elementor, Divi, so on, or you're using Gutenberg blocks, various different ones, some good, some better, then there are certain things you still need to take into consideration. First important is working with setting things out when you're working with a desktop, tablet, and mobile. There are various different things you can do to optimize things. So for example, let's just take our home page. Let's go into Elementor. Let's open up our home page, and from there we're going to see some of the things that I think you need to be aware of when you're creating any kind of layout. Let's open this up with Elementor, and as you can see from our design, we've got this large hero section at the top. We've got several images in the main section. If we scroll down, we've got another large image at the bottom that's set in this sort of watermark. So we need to make sure that these are optimized, first of all, when we upload them, but also that we optimize the page design for various different devices. Again, desktop, tablets, mobiles. So first of all, compressing your images before you upload them, resizing them to the size that you need them, not just uploading them willy-nilly as you download them. That's the first thing. So if you want to have this work on a standard HD display, setting the width to around 1920 is going to be a good starting point. If you have complex images like I have here, there's going to be a trade-off between the physical size and the actual file size. Then we need to make sure that once you've done that, we compress them and optimize them. Now you can do this using a tool like Photoshop, or you can do them online with a tool like I'm going to show you in a moment, WP Compress, or you can use things like Short Pixel, Tiny PNG, Tiny JPEG, and so on. And you can upload the image or images to those services. It will compress them based upon what you want, the compression ratio, and then it allows you to download those. This is a great way of doing this totally free of charge. The only downside is it does take a little bit more time, whereas a tool like WP Compress or Short Pixel will do things behind the scenes for you on your server, and it can be quicker. Okay, so with that being said, we'll say we've optimized our images, we've resized. Next thing I want to take into consideration is based upon the device you're looking at. Now, at the moment, if we select this header section and go to the Style tab inside Elementor, this is our main hero image. And if we open this up and go to our media library, you can see I currently have two versions of this image. The first one is the one that's optimized for desktop, which generally is going to have a faster, higher speed connection than a lot of mobile devices. So as you can see, this is a larger physical and larger file size. If we take a look at the other version, you can see this is the hero section for the mobile. So it's a smaller image, 800 pixels wide, and around 6 times smaller in file size. So we can make sure we can optimize our images for the different devices. And Elementor and tools like this make it really easy to control how those background images are going to be displayed. So let's just close this down for a second. The hero image for the main section is fine on our desktop. Let's switch over now into mobile view, and you can see everything looks exactly the same. But if we open up this image, you can see we're using that smaller mobile optimized version. So it's good practice to make sure you have these images optimized for the various different sizes for the different devices to start off with. Now, if you don't want to use a service like Short Pixel or Tiny JPEG, Tiny PNG, you want to do this on the server, then we can use a tool like WP Compress. So if I open up WP Compress on this particular website, you can see I've got a few things set up. I've got the optimization levels. This says how much I want to optimize things. Lossless is going to have the smallest amount of compression and the best quality. So you're not going to see much of a difference in a lot of cases. Intelligent is kind of a middle of the road. It will compress as much as it can while still retaining the quality. And you can use Ultra, which will give you the least quality, but also the smallest file size. So this is one of those balancing things you need to make sure works across what you're trying to achieve with the image. We've also got various other things inside here alongside WebP. So this is creating the WebP versions of the images for us on the fly. And WebP is basically like JPEG, but smaller. In other words, it retains good quality, but you get a smaller file size. And this is what's called the next generation of sort of file formats, next gen format when it comes to images. And one of the things you'll see when you're doing your benchmarking is these are the kinds of things that you need to optimize. I've also disabled lazy loading because Astra out of the box gives you the option for lazy loading, so you can use that. We can go ahead and do bulk optimization, and you can see if I select that option, I've optimized all of my images, but you can, if you want to, also restore the images. This keeps the original copies alongside the optimized copies. Now, next on our list is dependent upon the kind of theme that you're using. If you're using one like Astra, this gives you some options to optimize various different parts of your site directly inside the theme. So for example, if we take a look now inside the Performance tab, in there you can see we've got a couple of different options to improve the performance. The first is loading the Google fonts locally. Now, I did a video recently about Google fonts and some of the problems that people are having where from a legal standpoint, it can be a problem. So having these loaded locally is a big benefit in various different ways. One, they're on your server, so nothing is being sent back and forth to Google, nothing to identify the user. Therefore, you cover yourself on the topic I covered in that previous video. But also, these can be cached. In other words, once they're kind of loaded onto the server, then it speeds up the process. There's no going to the Google servers to find that font, to come back and then load it. It's all done locally. You can also preload local fonts. And again, this is kind of caching those fonts to preload them to get them to be faster and therefore cut down any kind of flashes that are seen, and also just makes the whole thing just quicker. So take a look at the actual theme you're using for any performance options. I know Bloxy has performance options, Astra has performance options. Take a look inside there. See what you can optimize directly inside the theme. So next on our list is Perfmatters. And this is a plugin that you have to pay for, unfortunately, but it's not particularly expensive, but it can make a drastic difference to your website relatively simply. Now, I'm not going to go through all the different settings inside this particular plugin because there are lots and lots of settings. But what I will do is I will link to a video down below that Kyle Van Dusen from the admin bar did recently with one of the developers of Perfmatters, and they go through every single option, best practices, how to use them, when not to use them. I would highly recommend checking that video out. It's in the description below. Okay, so what we have when we load Perfmatters in is a set of different sections we can go through, as well as some more globalized sections and very localized sections. And I'll explain what I'm talking about as we go through. So first of all, we have the options panel. Now the options panel just simply allows you to enable and disable various different features that are part of WordPress straight out of the box. What you have is also great help. And one of the things that I really like about Perfmatters is they've taken the time to create really expansive help sections on every single function. So for example, disable emojis. If you don't know what that does, all you need to do is hover over the little question mark. That will give you a really simple tooltip. However, if you click on it, it will take you over to a dedicated help article on how to use this specific feature, when not to use it, the benefits, those kinds of things. So if you're unsure, then take a look at the documentation, because this is really going to open up the doors to what you can understand about how the various different features work. And like I say, there are great help documentation on here as well. So you've got full help. If you need any kind of support, my understanding is the technical support from the Perfmatters people it is fantastic. And if you've got any sort of you need help and advice and so on, they are the people to get in touch with, and they are very, very helpful in that matter. So check that out if you need it. But let's quickly take a look at what I've done. So you can see things like disable emojis, dash icons, embeds, and so on. Most of these you can safely disable. And each time you disable one of these, a little bit of code, depending upon the complexity of it, will be taken out of your pages, your site. Therefore, you will get speed improvements. They can be tiny, but in combination with each other, they can make a marked and noticeable difference. So things on here that you can safely disable in most cases, things like emojis. This just kind of gets rid of those default WordPress emojis, but your OS emojis will still display. And if you don't use those on your site, it makes no difference. Dash icons, embeds, those kinds of things, you can safely disable most of those. And the nice thing with this is you can disable things, go and test your site, check some pages out, make sure everything looks okay. And if anything breaks, you can come back in and you can just quickly flick that switch back, turn it off, go back in, refresh your site, clear the cache if you need to, and you can then go ahead and just make sure that everything is working again. It's really, really simple. So lots of things inside here you can safely remove. Some things you may not want to. For example, RSS feeds. In this website, I wouldn't use them. On the WPTuts website, I do use them, so I wouldn't then disable those. And there's lots of different options inside here. So you can see the kinds of things I've disabled. Things like the heartbeat, global styles, which is specific to working with Gutenberg. I'm using Elementor in this example, so I don't need those. You know, lots of things inside here. Take your time, read through, check them out, test them. You should be good to go. Login URL, as its name would suggest, it allows you to change the URL for the dashboard. It's always recommended, but you may be using something like iTheme Security, or you may be using a white label tool. You might have already set that up, but if you don't, this allows you to quickly and easily change that login URL. Just obviously don't forget where you changed it to. So you can save the changes on there, then go ahead and test your site. Now don't go and make all the changes and then test your site, because if something doesn't work, it's going to be a nightmare to try to problem solve. Next up, let's hop over to the Assets Manager. Now, the Assets Manager allows you to control exactly what is loaded in and sometimes how they're loaded in and what's excluded. Now, this may be one of those things that if you are relatively new to optimizing your site, you may just want to stick with the simple, easy settings that don't really have a massive technical requirement. So for example, we can enable the script manager, and we'll come on to the script manager in a moment because this is incredibly powerful. But you could do things like JavaScript, defer the JavaScript. So this just basically means that instead of JavaScript loading when the page starts to load, it will push it further down the list, and therefore your page should load faster, and then JavaScript can be loaded in afterwards. Generally, this has a noticeable speed impact on your website. If you have a website that isn't using jQuery, it's using the normal built-in jQuery as part of WordPress, you could include the jQuery, but I would highly recommend you test that out if you enable it. Then you can, if you want to, exclude any JavaScript files from this deferring option. So if you've got things you don't want deferred, you need to have these loaded in right at the beginning, you can drop the links to those inside there. Again, probably more technical, but it's there should you need it when you get more comfortable. And the same thing goes for the delay JavaScript. You can choose the delay behavior. There are two options inside there. If you delay it, you can only delay specified scripts, then you have to specify what scripts they are. Or you can say delay all scripts, and that's probably the preferred option because that will make sure that the order in which those scripts are loaded in is maintained. So if you do choose the option to delay it, I would generally recommend testing out the delay all scripts as the default option. And then if you find a problem, you can rectify from there. You've also then got things like the delay timeout. Again, I would recommend taking a look at the options here to see exactly how they work. The CSS, now this is something that is still in beta or beta phase, so this may be updated when you watch this video. But what this basically does is this allows you to strip out any CSS that's not being needed on that page, therefore making the CSS file smaller. And then you can choose how you want to deal with that, the CSS method, whether you want to do it inline or you want a separate file for this, how you want to deal with it, whether you want to delay things, to set it up asynchronously or to remove it. And if you want to, you can exclude specific style sheets and you can exclude specific selectors. So lots of options there. And you can, if you want to, clear that used CSS code. You've also then got code injection for the header, the body, and the footer. Great if you want to include various different JavaScript, CSS files, things inside there. You can do it without the need for another plugin. Now, the preloading section is very powerful and relatively simple. You can see we can enable instant page. Now, this is something that I would recommend you switch on because this can have a noticeable impact, not on your page speed scores, but for the end user. And what this does is, once your page is loaded in, it then goes to start loading in the pages that are behind the scenes, the links to your other pages on your site. Therefore, when someone clicks on it, it's already preloaded most, if not all, of the assets of that next page, and it feels instantaneous. So enable that, test it, and you should find that you get a perceivable speed increase across your site when you're using it. Might not be reflected, like I say, in those page speed scores, but it will feel so much snappier. You can then go ahead and control preloaded files. Now, for example, you may want to preload your font files. This is being handled in this example by the Astra theme, but you could manually set this up, or you could preload things like header images, footer images, those kinds of things. And all you need to do is drop in the full link inside there, choose the type of file that it is, whether it's things like a font, an image, an object, those kinds of things. You can even go ahead and specify what device or devices you want this to be preloaded onto. So you may want to preload things for mobile, but not for desktop, or vice versa, or both. Well, you can do that inside here. You can also even go right the way down to choosing exactly what location, what page, what section, those kinds of things on your site will have those assets preloaded. Pretty cool. Next, you've got the preload critical images. Now, this is still a beta or beta sort of feature. So take this and test it, make sure it works okay. If you find there's any problems, you may want to disable it. But what this does is this allows you to choose images on a page, on a site, and so on. They'll be preloaded straight away. So this is something that by default, my understanding is that normally it will preload 2 images. So things like it's expected that the first image is going to be on the page is probably going to be your logo. Well, you can set this up to preload up to 5 images. I would probably recommend sticking to around 2 or 3, but play with those to find out what kind of results and if it makes much of a difference on your site. You can then go ahead and do things like pre-connect, and you can choose what you want to pre-connect to. So things like fonts, those kinds of things, or CDNs, you can do that. And again, probably a bit more of an advanced feature. Check out the documentation, but you can add as many inside here as you want to. You can even do things like the DNS prefetch. Again, probably more technical than we need to worry about. Lazy loading. If your theme or your image optimizer is already using lazy load, don't enable it inside here. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some kind of weird double glitching kind of thing going on. But if it doesn't, or you want to use this and disable it everywhere else, so you've got one set location for all of your optimization, then you can do it inside here. Fonts, we're already using Astra's ability to preload and use localized versions, but if you don't, or again, you want to keep this all in one place, you can use the option inside here. You can disable Google Fonts completely if you're not using them. If you're just using system fonts, you can disable them completely. So there's options inside there, and if you're using a CDN, you can also drop in the CDN URL. And we can clear any local fonts. CDN, if you're using something like Bunny CDN or Cloudflare, for example, then you can set up the relevant information inside here to speed things up and deliver content wherever you are in the world, all built into Perfmatters. And finally, we have analytics. So if you want to use Google Analytics, but you don't want to have it hosted on the Google servers, again, in the same way that we wanted to avoid using Google servers to send information back and forth to the Google server, and the legal implications that are coming out about that, you can have that hosted locally. So that's pretty cool. You just drop in the relevant information, enable the local analytics, and that should help you then dealing with that. And if you want to, if you're using Monster Insights, you can set that up inside here. You can anonymize IP addresses, those kinds of things, to make sure that you are complying with those legal things that we have to comply with more and more on the daily. Now, before we take a look at the script manager, let's hop over to the tools section, because there's a couple of things inside here that I think are useful just to see, even if you don't want to use them. First of all, you can choose to clean and install. If you select that, once you remove Perfmatters, it will take all of the settings, everything that's been changed, and completely take all that away, cleaning up any locations where that's been left. All done. I always like to see this being done. You've also got accessibility mode that gives you certain accessibility features to make working with a plugin easier. And you've got things like purging options. You can export and import settings. If we hop over to the database section, this allows you to manage and maintain your database, to optimize that. As WordPress is used on a daily basis and new content is added and so on, then we get post revisions, we get auto drafts, we get lots of things. All that information is stored in the database. This allows you to clean that out. So you can see the number of different revisions, auto drafts, those kinds of things. And if you want to, you can just wipe those out. You can also optimize the database, and you can also set this to be scheduled to clean that out daily, weekly, or monthly. But that's great to see that option inside there, because it again removes the need for a tool like WP Sweep. It allows you to clean up your database. So now we've seen the key things that Perfmatters offers. Let's take a look at one final thing that I think is incredibly powerful. Let's hop over into our pages. Let's open up our homepage one more time and take a look at the script manager. So you can see we've got a new entry inside here once we enable it as part of Perfmatters, which is the script manager. So let's click to open that up. So now this is currently for our home page, but we can also set global values. And what this is doing is this shows us all of the scripts, whether they're JavaScript or CSS, that are being loaded in on our page. Tells us the file size, the link to that particular function, and we can go ahead and we can optimize things inside here. So for example, let's just say you've got a plugin like, a forms plugin. Well, that will generally tend to load all of its scripts in everywhere throughout your entire site. And that's not what you want. You only want that information to be loaded in on the page that has a form on it. So we can go ahead and we can safely disable that. So if we scroll down, you can see I've already gone ahead and I've started to configure things inside here for our homepage. Now we've got WP Forms Lite, which is the plugin that's been installed as part of Astra. Now what I've done is I've disabled this. You can see I can turn this on and I can turn this off. Set this to be off, and we said locations everywhere. Okay, so now we can go ahead if we want to, and we can specify any kind of exceptions inside this. So on our homepage, that's perfectly fine. However, let's just jump back out of this, go back to our dashboard. Let's go back to our pages, and let's open up our contact page, because I want to show you the difference. I've got the script manager up inside there. I'm going to scroll through, and you see there's our WP Forms Lite, and as you can see, that is still set to be off. We've still set to be location everywhere, but I've set an exception for this particular page, which I've set to be current URL. So you can see the total file on this is 83.7 kilobytes. Well, we don't want to load that in on every single page, but we do need it on our contact page. So I've set up a simple stipulation that everywhere else this is disabled except for the current URL, which in this example now is the contact form page. And you can just repeat that process for anything you want to remove. So things like Font Awesome 5 and Font Awesome 4, which is part of the Elementor page builder. I'm not using Font Awesome icons at all, so I can safely disable that. And as you can see, between the two of those, that gives me a saving of around about 80K, which doesn't sound like a lot. When you start to stack these on top of each other, it really does mount up considerably. So you can take your time, go through and set the rules that you want, set any exceptions you want for pages or entire sections. For example, you may have a social media plugin to share things. Well, you may only want to use that on your posts pages and not anywhere else, all of your different post items. Well, you can set an exception up on there so it only shows on the posts and everywhere else is disabled, and therefore that code is not loaded in on all of your other pages. This is really, really powerful. If we go over to the global view, this will then show us an overview of all of the settings that we set up. So you can see, we can see exactly where everything is disabled and what is disabled. We can also see what's enabled. And we can, if we want to, delete any of the rules from here. So if we find something isn't working properly, we can quickly come in, delete it inside this sort of overview section. And as you start to create more comprehensive and complex setups for your script manager, this is going to grow bigger as you set things up, especially on complex, comprehensive sites. Now, if we jump over to the settings section, there are a few things inside here that you may want to take a look at. So for example, you've got things like testing mode. Now, testing mode is something that can be useful if you're trying to tweak and configure things using Perfmatters on a live site. What this does is it restricts to only admins and logged in admins seeing the changes and so on. So therefore, it should stop you having a problem with breaking your site with live visitors. Then once you've done everything and you're happy with it, you could then disable testing mode and those will be rolled out to the actual live site. You've also got the reset script manager. So if you've made a pile of changes and things have just gone haywire, instead of going through and trying to fault find, you can reset that and it will wipe out completely everything you've done inside the script manager. Once you've done that, you can hit save. Most of the other things inside here are probably more advanced, so you don't need to worry too much about those. So I would recommend probably just avoiding those, maybe using the testing mode if you need to use it. So now we've seen all of the different tools I've used. We've seen the end results. Hopefully what this has demonstrated is if you take a little bit of time and effort, choose solid tools to make sure that you start off with the best possible chance of having a relatively optimized site before you even need to go and take tools like Perfmatters and WP Compress and use those to eke out those extra little bits of performance. But you've seen how I would go about approaching this. You've seen the end results. Now I'd like to pass this over to you. What tools do you use? How do you find them? Would you give me any recommendations? Are you a Perfmatters user? What's your thoughts and findings on it? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, all of the applicable links for everything I've covered are in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.